Why we're confident the Commanders can get a win this weekend in Dallas, and why we're not so sure that they can get a win this weekend in Dallas. We'll tell you both sides of that story coming up right now on the Locked On Commanders podcast. Let's go.
Your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome in, Locked On Commander. Welcome in, Commanders fans, to the Locked On Commanders podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We are your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders, free and available on all platforms, including YouTube and the WUSA 9 Plus app on your Roku or Amazon Fire Stick. And of course, we thank you for making us your first listener, your first view of the day. I'm David Harrison. My co-host is Chris the Rooster Russell, both of us credential media covering your Commanders. Chris for the Team 980, where you'll find he and Pete Medhurst live from 9 a.m. to noon Eastern, Monday through Friday, or anytime on the Audacy app. And you can find me at Commander Country, part of Sports Illustrated's Fan Nation, where I'm writing as many things as I can about your burgundy and gold.
I hope for your sake, David, there's some positive things that you have to write about at some point soon. But for now, we soldier on. We welcome you to this edition of the Locked On Commanders podcast. Again, we are free and available on all platforms. Thank you for making us your first view or listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Brightco Jewelry and Watch Insurance. Brightco brings you comprehensive, fast, and affordable jewelry insurance for as low as $5 per month. Check out our special offer for Locked On listeners and get covered in under 2 minutes at Brightco, bright.co/locked on. That's bright.co/locked on. All right, coming up, our biggest confidence and our biggest concerns for the Commanders heading into week 4 as they head to AT&T Stadium against the Dallas Cowboys. That's coming up, but first we need to dive into the most recent injury report. David was at Command Central, if you will. I forgot the new corporate name, of course, but in Ashburn, Virginia on Thursday, as he is several times throughout the week, covering practices and everything in between for us here at Locked On. And David, you didn't see Wes Schweitzer practice because he's still dealing with a concussion. He did not practice for a second day, but there was a little bit of good news along the way. Milo Eifler, the linebacker, special teamer, Charles Leno with the shoulder, and James Smith-Williams, abdomen, were all limited on Thursday. All did not take part in Wednesday's practice, if memory serves. And everyone else was full go, including a bunch of guys that were limited on Wednesday or coming off of injuries, including Benjamin St. Juste with the hamstring injury. He was limited on Wednesday, and William Jackson III, who, of course, missed last week's game. Plus, it looks like, at least we're trending towards this now, that Casey Toohill and Daniel Wise might actually be able to get back out onto the field on Sunday. They both had to miss last week against Philadelphia. So from an injury perspective, it looks pretty good, to be quite honest with you.
Yeah, it's definitely getting better. You know, I mean, you could always be healthier. I think that's just kind of the mantra in the National Football League. It's not a matter of who's got injuries and who doesn't have injuries. It's who has the fewest injuries that makes a difference. And for the Washington Commanders on Thursday, getting 3 offensive linemen upgraded. I mean, the defensive linemen, great. You know what I mean? Casey Hill, Daniel Wise getting upgraded is absolutely huge. But when you're kind of comparing and contrasting the two, if you've got Jonathan Allen, Daron Payne, Montez Sweat, and your full starting offensive line, you'll take that. You know, if you got to lose a Daniel Wise or a Casey Toohill in there somewhere, you don't want to, but you would make that sacrifice. Now, I'm not saying that the Commanders are going to have their full starting offensive line because let's be quite honest, like Wes Schweitzer, everybody is. I mean, I don't know that it's been made official. I don't know that it's not been made official, but everybody. I mean, Nick Martin as the starting center this weekend is basically what everybody is talking about and going up against his brother Zach Martin's Dallas Cowboys. And you know, the glimmer of hope, talking about writing good things. I put in my injury update column on SI Fan Nation's Commander Country that, hey, look, Nick Martin is undefeated against brother Zach. So I suppose there's a silver lining to that. If you're going to have your third center playing in your fourth game for your quarterback, at least it's one that knows how to beat the other brother's team. I don't know how much water it actually holds, but you know, it's more anecdotal than anything. But hey, right now we're grasping for whatever we can get. But still, getting 3 offensive linemen upgraded on Thursday, getting 2 defensive linemen upgraded, and of course Benjamin St. Juste, who had one of the better games against Philadelphia Eagles upgraded as well. Those are all very, very good signs moving into the final practice of the week.
Yeah, before we get to the Cowboys injury situation, just one note on Martin. I believe it was the post-game episode. It may have been the Tuesday episode that we did together before we did the individuals. Talked about Nick Martin maybe possibly being the starter. And that was quite honestly before we even knew that Wes Schweitzer, or I didn't know. I don't know if you knew. I missed it. If you knew that Schweitzer had concussion, it was simply like a job-related performance. Like Schweitzer's not a natural center, and he struggled on Sunday, especially early on with the pass rush, and of course throughout with some of the snaps. And maybe they thought, some of the snaps may have affected Carson Wentz in some degree. I don't know. So I was kind of expecting Martin to be the starter. What I didn't know this week, what I found out, I didn't know that he was Zach Martin's brother. Number one, my bad on that. Number two, I didn't know that he was Carson Wentz's center at the Senior Bowl in Mobile, Alabama, way back in 2016. So how about that? Carson Wentz's hands have been under Nick Martin's
snap area.
Yeah.
We call it the snap area. The ball transition area zone. The ball transition zone.
Well, that's a more professional way to say it. I said Tookus, which, is not as bad as something else that I can say. Anyway, for the Cowboys, no Dak Prescott for a second day in a row. I mean, look, he's not going to play. We all kind of knew that, but Cooper Rush can still present problems, but here's a couple of interesting ones. DeMarcus Lawrence, Connor McGovern, they're sort of starting left guard, although they've done a nice job there kind of covering that up. Dalton Schultz and Jaron Kearse were all limited on Thursday. Michael Gallup was full go. It very much looks like he's going to make his season debut on Sunday. We'll see about Schultz. I would imagine Schultz will be listed as questionable, but trending towards playing, David. We will have the full injury report, the full final injury report, and any news and information Friday. Once it becomes available, we will post that at LO Commanders. Any thoughts on the Cowboys seemingly getting healthier?
Yeah, I mean, just, again, I think the question has been Dak. I remember leaving the stadium, Sunday after the Eagles game, the people were already talking about whether or not Dak was going to return. Yeah. Then, of course, he says what he says ahead of Monday Night Football and gets everybody stirred up about maybe he's going to come back. And again, we all basically lean to Cam Curl, not saying that the injury is the same or even the surgery or the recovery is the same. But again, if it took a safety 2 to 3 weeks to come back from a thumb injury and thumb surgery, a quarterback whose the injured thumb is on his throwing hand, you figure is going to take longer than 3 weeks. The original prognosis was 4 to 6 weeks. I think that's much more likely what you're seeing. So I don't expect to see Dak Prescott. But like you said, Cooper Rush has proven to be a capable quarterback if defenses don't kind of force the issue with him. So we'll see how they handle that. Dalton Schultz and Michael Gallup. Honestly, I think Dalton Schultz is the bigger return potentially. Again, limited with that knee injury. So if he can come back, I think that's a bigger gain than what Michael Gallup brings. Not because I don't like Michael Gallup, but because Noah Brown has been doing such a great job kind of in his absence. But of course, any weapons that an offense can add, they're going to be happy to do so.
Interesting. All right, coming up, David and I will tell you who we think wins this Commanders-Cowboys game. But before we do that, we tell you about our friends at Prite.co. Imagine the perfect setting. You've done everything right. You have the love of your life, the person of your dreams standing by and just waiting for you to pop the question. Family, your family, they're hiding at a distance. Again, you've said everything right. You've unturned every stone, except you didn't get insurance for the ring that you're about to put around your special person forever's finger. You haven't done it, and then what happens? You're trying to take it out of the box. Fumble! Kind of like Antonio Gibson likes to do from time to time. You fumble the ring out of the case and into the crack of the pier that you're set up on, and you can't get to it. You can't find it. Sounds like how you would feel kind of after watching the last two Commanders games, right? Or at least how we feel. Well, if you would have listened to us and gone to Bright Co. Jewelry Insurance, you could have been backed up 100% in a simple 2-minute drill. That's right. Bright.co isn't just about rings. You can ensure that special watch or necklace, whatever you need to do, and do it quickly at bright.co/locked on or on a quick phone call. And for just $5 a month, bright.co/locked on is the place you want to go to check out the bottom line and some fun videos on exactly what you shouldn't do. But what you should do is get some protection from the guys at bright.co. All right, thanks again for making the Locked On Commanders podcast your first listen and or your first view of the day. We have bold predictions coming up shortly, but first we're going to share our confidence and concern points for the Washington Commanders heading into week 4. So, David, as you head to AT&T Stadium and you're heading there along with the Commanders, I don't know if you're going to be wearing a black uniform or not. We'll get to that in a sec. But what is your biggest confidence going into week 4? And I don't know if it's a must win, but it's a pretty darn important win.
Yeah, it's certainly an important win. I guess nothing is a must win in the first quarter of the season, but nobody wants to start the first quarter of the season going 1-3. I can tell you that. You need to go at least 2-2. You want to win more quarters than you tie or lose. But if you lose the first quarter, you're already kind of setting yourself behind the 8 ball. Now you're really in a situation where you got to start winning games. The biggest thing that I find confidence in with this team, and it's gonna fall on deaf ears a little bit, and I understand the attitude and the atmosphere around the team right now, but it's that the message is consistent. And honestly, this is something that I noticed down in the locker room following the loss to the Philadelphia Eagles. Ron Rivera, and I know a lot of us we talked about it on this show, and I know a lot of other people kind of didn't appreciate or didn't necessarily like how kind of often he kind of kept going back to the explosive plays. Of not giving up explosive plays and all those things. And after the game, after they've given up, so many explosive plays against Philadelphia Eagles, you heard Kendall Fuller, he was getting talked to in his locker, and he talked about giving up the explosive plays, and he kind of took ownership for some of the ones that he was involved in and all that stuff. So at least the message is getting through, right? Because when we're talking about an organization that's struggling, to get on the same page, the first thing you got to do is get everybody to understand that they're on the same message. Like before we even get to the end state, let's just all make sure, are we even pulling in the right direction, in the same direction? Because if we're all pulling in different directions, honestly, there's nothing that's ever going to get right. So hearing Kendall Fuller right after the game, before the coaches really had an opportunity to kind of get into their heads and get into their ears and all that stuff, hearing him kind of echo the same sentiment that his coach has been echoing and then continue to during the week showed that at least the players are on the same page and they're on the same wavelength. And coming into the game, Chris, all the talk was Jack Del Rio, right? And I remember saying to another media member, we're going to find out if these players really have lost confidence in Jack, or if Jack Del Rio has lost the locker room, or if Ron Rivera has lost the locker room. And I would tell you, even as bad as that game went for honestly, it was a very short stretch that the game went really bad. But even for that stretch that the game went really, really bad, those guys never stopped, and they never stopped fighting. And honestly, they were in position to make some of these plays. They just didn't make them. So to hear that they're on the same wavelength, to see that they are out there fighting for each other and doing kind of trying to get done what the coaches are telling them to get done, that gives me confidence that this team can build. Is that going to directly reflect in this weekend and produce a win? I can't tell you that. But at least if you have an organization that is saying the same things, pulling in the same direction, you have a chance to get it together. That's my biggest confidence coming into this weekend.
That's an interesting perspective, and I like that. And you're right. For as chaotic and as dysfunctional as this place has been and can be, you really haven't heard any whispers of, players not believing in Ron Rivera and or Jack Del Rio or even Scott Turner, quite honestly. And usually you do that. And of course it's early. It's 1-2. For me, it's not 1-2, just a couple of close losses. It's 1-2 the way you've kind of lost them, which is the thing that drives me kind of crazy. But going into this game for me, David, there's one thing I'm confident about. They'll show up in their snazzy little black uniforms on Sunday. After that, nothing is guaranteed. And worse than nothing is guaranteed, nothing is even reasonable to expect. Every week we do this show and we say, well, if they do the screen game, if they run the ball more, if they get off the field on third down, if they get better pass rush pressure, if they get more takeaways, if they don't turn over. And every week it's like something different, and it's an ambush of a different style, or at least when I say every week, the last 2 weeks, right? We all know how dreadful they have been in the first half. Usually they've been dreadful on defense to start out games, and in the first half, it's usually not the offense that's dreadful in the first half. But this year, or the last 2 weeks, it's been both the offense and the defense at times, and largely the offense the last 2 weeks. So I guess that's a long-about way of saying, I don't know what exactly to expect. I don't even know what's reasonable. I hope they'll be in the game. I hope they'll come in with their hair on fire. I'll hope they come in like they were kicked in a place that you don't want to get kicked in. But I just don't know if that will happen or not. My biggest concern coming into this game, David, before we get to yours, is guys like Tony Pollard and the supporting cast weapons of the Cowboys breaking the back of the Commanders. You mentioned in our first segment Dalton Schultz, and we don't know at this point if he'll definitively play, but I think he will. Guys like Dalton Schultz, guys like Tony Pollard, who has speed, as everyone knows, guys like Michael Gallup, who's going to make his return, Noah Brown, who, again, a lot of people are kind of becoming familiar with. Everybody talks about Micah Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence. That's great. Guys like Quentin Bohanna and Dorrance Armstrong and Anthony Barr, part of that front seven, are they going to clean up, and are they going to eat? Because there's so much focus on Micah Parsons and maybe Ezekiel Elliott, or maybe CeeDee Lamb, and then the secondary or tertiary guys are going to eat. So that's my biggest concern.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's great to look, beyond the surface, and I think that's an important thing to do, and so I applaud you for doing that, because I think a lot of people, like you said, are going to be fixated on the stars. I'm one of those people. Micah Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence are my reason to not have confidence, my reason to be concerned, because look, Dallas is number one in the NFL right now in sacks per pass attempt, right. Number one, and it's not even particularly close. To be quite honest with you, of the 13 sacks the Dallas Cowboys have this season, Micah Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence account for over half of them. Over half of those sacks are coming from those two guys. So the way I look at it is, if you shut down those two guys, you know what? Some of those other guys, you're 100% right. They may still eat, but they're not eating. Those other guys are not eating at a rate that DeMarcus Lawrence and Micah Parsons are eating at right now. So if you don't account for those two guys, and if you don't take care of business against them, honestly, it doesn't even matter what the other guys are going to be doing. But if you can take care of them, if you can keep them from disrupting the game every single possession, then you have a boxer's chance. I'll put it to you that way. Also, the Washington Commanders right now giving up the fourth most sacks per pass attempt in the National Football League. Of course, last week that might skew the numbers a little bit. I think if you take last week as kind of an anomalous type of situation, they're probably more middle of the road there in that stat category. But I mean, look, as much as you're 100% right, these other players are paid to play as well, and they're NFL talents as well. None of them are Micah Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence. Today, Jahan Dotson said that Micah Parsons, he's confident in saying that Micah Parsons is the best defensive player in the National Football League, and he's been seeing it since they were young, getting recruited together before they even made it to Penn State. He knows what Micah Parsons is capable of. The Washington Commanders better be ready for him.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I totally see your point, and I like what you said about doing it at the rate, because they can wreck games or they can win games on their own and do it pretty darn quickly. Coming up, our final predictions of the week, and for Week 4 in Dallas, will the Commanders in their fancy, snazzy black uniforms get the win on Sunday? David and I predict that next on the Locked On Commanders podcast.
All right, final segment here on the final episode of the Locked On Commanders podcast. Before 1 p.m. Eastern time Sunday, your Washington Commanders visit Jerry's World Dallas Cowboys at AT&T Stadium for their Week 4 matchup. Washington's either going to be 1-3 or 2-2 coming out of the first quarter of this season. Obviously, we want it to be 2-2, Chris.
Yes.
And in order for that to happen, some things are going to happen. some of them might be bold things that happen, some momentum shifting plays or one that go one way or the other. Some might go Dallas's way, some might go Washington's way. Chris, what's your bold prediction for this weekend's game?
Yeah, well, I mean, I wish I could tell you that I feel really good about saying this, but I don't. And maybe this is an overreaction to what we've seen not only last week throughout the game, but David also in the first half, really, against Detroit. And knowing what state the offensive line is in, even though we mentioned they might be getting some guys back, still some moving pieces, still some really, really, really bad pass production. I guess, pass protection skill sets, if you will, that I think have been exposed big time over the last 2 weeks. So to me, my bold prediction is Carson Wentz is going to get knocked out of this game at some point, and we're going to see Taylor Heineke on the field. Now, listen, again, I don't want any injury. I'm not rooting for injury. I'm not hoping for injury. I want to make that clear. But I do have a responsibility to tell you what I think and what I feel. And I just don't know how Carson Wentz, who has the propensity to hold on to the ball too long, Scott Turner, who doesn't love, for whatever reason, to design, call, or at least by what we can judge, plan a very, very, very short by design passing game and run the ball enough. Even though I think they'll do that better this week, I just think for whatever reason, Carson Wentz gets knocked out of this game. And again, I'm not rooting for injury. I'm not rooting for myself to be right, but that's my bold prediction.
Yeah, I mean, look, if he gets hit as much as he did against Philadelphia, I mean, eventually, someone's going to pay for all that. And unfortunately, if you're the guy taking the punishment, whether it's your fault, the offensive line fault, the play caller's fault, or a combination of the three, which I stand on, it's combination of three. Scott Turner said it's a combination of the three. It's not all in one. It's one, on all of them type of a deal. I mean, look, eventually your quarterback's going to get hurt. That's just kind of the ratio of things. My bold prediction, a little bit more in favor of the Commanders. Terry McLaurin talked earlier this week, Chris, that he and Scott Turner had a conversation about his lack of early usage in games. They kind of talked about some ideas, some things that maybe Terry could do, and maybe some schematic shifts that they could have to get Terry more involved earlier in the game. Scott Turner acknowledged in his press conference on Thursday afternoon that, there's things that they need to do and want to do. So look, it's not just something the fans are noticing. It's not just something the media is noticing. Like, this is your star player and your coordinator having a meeting, a one-on-one conversation about this. Not that Terry is complaining, about targets from the sense of I need, my targets. It's more so I need to figure out a way to help this team start faster and get started better. So let's just clear that up right now. So my bold prediction, Chris, Terry McLaurin is going to set a season high for receptions this week in the first half.
Oh,
right now, Terry McLaurin, 11 of his 12 receptions this season, all second half receptions. He has
wait.
First quarter.
You said 11 of 12?
11 of his 12 receptions are all second half receptions.
That means how many catches does he have in the first half, David?
One first half catch so far this year. That came against the Jacksonville Jaguars, and that one was in the second quarter. So he has no first quarter reception so far this season. Chris, Terry McLaurin's season high right now is 6 catches, which he had against the Philadelphia Eagles, all of them in the second half. He is going to have 7 catches in the first half.
Ooh, how about
that? That is my prediction, my bold prediction. Look, fantasy guys, I can't tell you how many, that might be 7 catches for 27 yards, guys. Okay. I'm just saying, there might be some screens, some quick passes here and there. I'm not telling you that, Terry McLaurin is going to go off and get 3 touchdowns on 140 yards in those 7 catches, but 7 catches in the first half. That's my bold prediction. Chris, key players. Let's kick it over to you for your key player of this game.
All right, I'm going to go with Kendall Fuller and maybe a punching bag effect from last week. Kendall Fuller got beat for that 4th down touchdown. At the end of the first half, Kendall Fuller got beat on another big play by Devontae Smith. Kendall Fuller got run away from on a medium crossing route by Devontae Smith. Kendall Fuller was not good last week. I think everybody knows that. What people did not realize, except for on this show, because we pointed it out all along, is Kendall Fuller did not have a good preseason. I don't know, David, what he looked like in practice. You watched the practices. I'm sure he's fine. He did not play well against Carolina or Kansas City, in my opinion, and maybe it's not so much my humble opinion. And He has not played well in really, honestly, all 3 regular season games, with the worst coming against Philadelphia. So with Michael Gallup back, with CeeDee Lamb back, with Dalton Schultz likely back, with the Cowboys, and I think Cooper Rush has got a better arm than people think. Whether he can pull the string or not, I'm not sure, but I think they're going to attack Kendall Fuller. I think they're going to see if they can get Kendall Fuller exposed for his lack of big-time, top echelon, and top-end speed, and I think it's probably going to be a tough day for Kendall Fuller as my key player.
It could be. Look, it's almost easier, right, when you look at a guy and say, well, he got beat because he made the wrong read. He bid on the play action, whatever. He got juked out of his shoes. It's almost easier when that happens because you can point directly to, well, if he just does this, this, and this, he's good. Here's the problem with Kendall Fuller last week. He was in position. He was in coverage. Like, he was in the right spot, man. Like, he was where you want number 29 to be. He just got beat. And look, I tweeted it. I mentioned it on the radio. Like, if you're getting out physicaled by Devontae Smith, like, no shade to Devontae Smith, but his game is not physicality, right? We talked about this. If you're getting out physical by Devontae Smith, there's a problem with the physical ability, not athletic ability, physical ability in your quarterback. Kendall Fuller got dogged against Philadelphia Eagles. Let's find out how much dog comes back, because the Dallas Cowboys are going after him. Guys, look, this is a copycat league. The Dallas Cowboys, first of all, they've played Kendall Fuller. They know what they can get away with against him. But now they saw what happened against Philadelphia. And they know this is a guy, like, he's going to say all the right things. This man is not running a full confidence. You can't. There's no way to run full confidence after you get beat like that. The Dallas Cowboys are coming after him early. If he steps up, fantastic. But if he doesn't, it could be a very, very long day. And to your point, in practice, Kendall Fuller looked great this training camp. Like, on the sideline of practice, everybody's like, man, this might be a career season for Kendall Fuller. But you're right, man. Like, the limited preseason, it's just like, okay, that's not the same Kendall Fuller. And then so far the season, that is nowhere near it. And look, he's seen the Washington Commanders offense a lot more than he's seen all these other offenses. That might be the reason he looks so good in training camp practices. I don't know what it is. Yeah. All I can tell you is it is night and day from what we saw in August to what we see right now. And the Dallas Cowboys, again, they're going to find out. They're also going to find out how much resiliency Carson Wentz has, because again, just like you said, just like everybody else said, Carson said it himself, he owns some of those 9 sacks. You know what I mean? And if he does the same behaviors, he missed some open reads, didn't get the ball out quick. He got too focused on what the defense was doing instead of trying to focus on getting the ball out and giving his playmakers a chance to make a play. If he does the same thing, you might be looking at 9 more sacks, and that might be where your bold prediction comes true. So Carson Wentz, very simply, just for that matter, let's see the development. Let's see the development within Washington. Does he take a step forward in getting the ball out quicker, and being that guy that facilitates his offensive line not having to protect him as much? Be a guy that helps out your offensive line as much as you want them to. Chris, time for our score predictions. Dallas is favored in this one at home by a field goal, which is actually a little bit closer than I probably expected it to be. My score prediction, I dropped it on the crossover yesterday with Marcus Mosher, Locked On Cowboys. If you haven't checked that out, please do. I've got the Cowboys winning 24-21 by that field goal. I'll give you guys the quick version if you want the whole breakdown of why I picked that score. Again, head back to the crossover. But essentially, some of the problems we're seeing with the Washington Commanders, we were seeing a Goldilocks scenario, right? The first week wasn't perfect, but the opponent made it to where the Commanders come out with a win. And then you see the defense fall apart. Then you see the offense fall apart. Until I see this team get in that soft spot right in the middle where they're playing complementary football, it's hard for me to say they're going to do it. Meanwhile, the Dallas Cowboys are a team that not only know how to play off each other, they're very opportunistic. They're taking advantage of opportunities when they come up, whereas the Washington Commanders simply are not doing that right now.
Yeah, right about now, the Commanders, for me, David, need someone to beat themselves as opposed to counting on the Commanders to beat the opponent. And that's what they got in week 1, and that's not what they've gotten in week 2 and week 3. And I don't believe that's going to happen again in week 4. Maybe week 5 will be different with Tennessee and then Chicago and so on and so forth. We'll deal with that next week. For me, I like the Cowboys in this one as well, but I'm going to go with a little bit wider of a margin. I'm going to go 21-13. So Dallas covering the 3. It's 3 as of this recording at Bet Online, our partners there. So it could, again, slightly go up, slightly dip down, but we'll go with the 3, and I'll say Dallas minus the 3. And just a quick note why I feel that way. Again, I just, I just feel like they'll be more competitive. I think they'll be there. I think they'll give themselves a chance, but I don't trust them at this point, and I never really have, to, again, not beat themselves more than just the opponent beating them. The opponent does a decent job of that, but they also beat themselves. And until I see a correction in that, I can't pick them, quite honestly, against better teams. So that's where we're at with that. So 21-13 for me, Dallas 24-21 for David. David, have a great trip to AT&T Stadium. I hope you enjoy it. It's one of the best NFL stadiums on planet Earth for sure. Thanks again for making the Locked On Commanders podcast your first listen and your first view of the day. Now make your second listen and view the Peacock and Williamson NFL show. Brian Peacock, former NFL scout Matt Williamson, giving you the expert NFL analysis in less than 30 minutes. It's free and available wherever you get your podcast. So as we mentioned, David is heading to AT&T Stadium in Dallas. If the football gods and the technology gods cooperate, David will be with us from AT&T on Sunday. I'll be in my home studio. Exact time to be determined for the live reaction and post-game extravaganza. If you want to join us, 301-615-3577. It's 301-615-3577 on the voicemail, or lockedonwashingtoncommanders@gmail.com. For David Harrison, who's covering the Washington Commanders for Commanders Country on SI.com's Fan Nation, I'm Chris Russell, one half of the Russell and Medhurst Show on the Team 980 and the Audacy app. If you're out and about, please be safe, be kind to one another, and thank you for joining us right here on the Locked On Commanders podcast.